It's been a few weeks since the entire set of Battle Spirit Saga has been revealed, and while I don't think we've cracked the meta just yet, I think we got a pretty good idea. Hey everybody, Espira, and we are back with another Battle Spirit Saga video. And this time we're going to explore kind of what the meta is looking like. We've seen a ton of deck profiles, whether it be myself or other content creators, a lot of different ideas being thrown around. And I think it's important for us to kind of contextualize where at least I think the meta is really looking like in terms of what to expect for Vegas and early on in terms of when the game actually releases. I think there's a ton of options. There's a lot of exploration still left. Every single day I'm trying out something new and rediscovering different aspects of decks I haven't considered. And of course, depending on what is the top deck, other decks will be able to main deck hate for it. And then hopefully there's an ebb and flow in how the meta kind of goes. Nevertheless, I do think it's important to kind of state off the ideas. Now, these are the back and forths I've had with other players, with other people part of the community, and kind of where I've landed on where I think decks are going. In terms of the way that I'm categorizing things, tier 1 is kind of like the decks I expect to win. If you're going to throw them into an event, which one are they going to win? Some of them get really close, and I wouldn't be shocked if they won, and those are the tier 2. Those are decks that are going to top, and guess what? With a hot run, they can win. I'd be like, yeah, okay, that could happen. It's not the one I would have put my money on winning. I'm not incredibly surprised. When we go down to tier 3, those are the playable decks. They're decks that can consistently do things. They've got some good matchups and bad matchups, and will kind of land you in that, 50-50 tier. If you're a more skilled pilot, maybe you can't even push into a top. But these are the decks that you really need to work to really try to get some results. And sometimes there are some matchups that you just won't do great in, or they don't do as much free work as the other top decks. Tier 4 is the oof tier. It's like you can try and do things. Maybe you can squeak in a win or two, and heck, maybe even have a good run and do really well with it. But these are the decks that like you really need to fight for, and you can kind of get there, but you're gonna have to really muster up a struggle to be able to really see value over playing this deck over something else. And then there's Rogue. Rogue is Rogue, of course. It's an idea, and against the right matchups and even against teching the right things to deal with the meta can maybe get there. And there's a couple. Surprisingly enough. So that's going to be a lot of fun there. In terms of some decks, I think I've categorized some as pures and the more generic versions. So for red and purple specifically, when we get into those, there are generic versions of those decks that use the best pieces that the whole color has altogether. But of course, some people really love their archetypes and their tribals. So if you go into a full pure archetype, I kind of lean it towards where I think those go eventually. To kick us off here, we have core depletion. Now, mind you, purple probably the best overall color in the game right now. It can kind of deal with everything, which means any variant of purple that you do run will do incredibly well. But however, if you're trying to focus on things like the Cursed Dragon combo, where you use the Skeleton Priest to be able to go into the Dragon or to get your opponent's board, or utilize only cards that do core depletion while you can do it and it's very controlly, there are some aspects of tempo that the deck misses out on. This is a deck that I'm sure will top. Again, any deck that runs red or purple, in my opinion, in this meta currently has a position to top just because of how good your cards are, or because of the options you have to dealing with what the meta is doing. But nevertheless, I think in terms of things with the Cursed Dragon combos and all that jazz, I think you can do a lot. I think if you run hot, you can get there. But I do think there's some consistency pieces you're missing if you go with a pure depletion deck. Alternatively, same thing with the Curse. I think I value Curse over core depletion. Like there's an argument you can make to that Curse by itself could probably go here, but if you want to go the pure Curse deck, only running Curse cards, using like 3 to 4x Medukes to be able to kind of use Blood Curse to whittle down your opponent, I think at that point you are taking away from things that the core depletion aspect has. So in neither aspect, and I think for most decks, think of it this way: don't go pure. Use the best options of every deck unless there's really a certain reason why you need to use a maximum density of a certain type of card to get your max value. Pterosaurs being one of those when we get to them. So in terms of purple, I think, hey, any version of purple you run has the possibility to top and do incredibly well because purple is just so incredibly good. And regardless of what version of the deck, whether you're pure Curse or pure core depletion, you are going to utilize the same nexuses and all that to kind of get there. Nevertheless, I think if you're going for a more hybrid build using the best parts of purple, which I'm representing with Beldegor here, then I think you are a deck that's looking to win not only Vegas, but other events going past the release of the game. I think you have so many control tools. You have amazing tempo in the terms of your early Curse cards. Your opponent doesn't want to trade with you for them. If they do trade for them, you have your nexuses that allow you to plus off of that, which is incredibly good. So in general, I think that the deck is super solid. It imposes a lot of threats on the board that your opponent needs to deal with. It has a fantastic removal. Cards like Beldegor, if you want to use Pendacles from the starter deck, is pretty okay as well. And you can utilize the best components of both Curse and core depletion to be a very menacing strategy. In the same vein, I think if you go red generic, same way I'm using Flamefish because I love Flamefish. If purple is the color that can like do everything in terms of seeing a ton of advantage, having good board presence, good tempo, red is the color that can deal with almost anything outside of incredibly large bodies, which at that point you just splash. So in that same vein, I think if you go with red and you go with a generic red where you're utilizing Star Dragons, don't get me wrong. I do think in red, you want to utilize things like going into Nova to board wipe your opponent to be able to gain life. I think that's still an incredibly powerful thing you want to do, but I don't think the best version of red right now is one that goes 100% pure Star Dragons. I think you need to utilize cards like Flamefish and other red utility cards, maybe cards that have Confront, which aren't really in Star Dragons, to be able to better control your opponent's board and be able to deal with things that are coming your way. But nevertheless, both of these colors are going to be incredibly powerful. They're the ones that deal with everything. I think the biggest reason as to why either purple or red generic decks are going to be the ones that take it all are specifically because of their ability to deal with everything, the amount of options they have. And while yes, any deck can splash purple cards, any deck can splash red cards, it's their ability to do so in color that allows them to be able to have better tempo over other colors that try to splash them, that I think gives them the edge and really gives them the pump up, especially when you tie it with their boss monsters, which are incredibly powerful. Now, switching over to the other color spectrum here, we have Luster OTK. So this is a deck that's hyper focused on doing your OTK and making sure that you just burst out your opponent every single time. It is really between oof and playable here because realistically, maybe not in Vegas because not everyone's going to have everything they're going to need for the event, but especially going into the first set, everyone's going to have the defensive tools they need, all their absolute ice shields. There are so many ways to disrupt this combo between removal, between like just having a board that your opponent doesn't have the removal in hand to be able to deal with. There's a lot you can do to mitigate what this strategy is trying to do to you, but nevertheless, it is definitely a deck that, hey, it'll win on turn 3 or turn 4, depending on how clumsy you are with giving your opponent cores. You can put yourself in a really good position to be able to just win, which is good. It'll do things sometimes. I just think it's incredibly way too fragile. I do think the better home for it is actually in a mid-range Luster deck, which is also still playable. I think going generic Luster that utilizes your Luster cards to be able to have a ton of board control and apply tempo pressure is more so the way you want to go about it. You're not all in on the combo, but nevertheless, it still feels like that color needs something more to be able to kind of push it over that playable state. I think you just need too much on board to make it work. You need like a specific type of body utilizing your Luster bodies, and then you specifically need Michaela, and because you need to protect Michaela, there are certain ways that you need to play around to make sure that she can stick around, or you have to play a certain way that forces the tempo on your side, and hopefully she banks around. So because it's so frail and relying very specifically on your key spirit, I think at that point it is very much in the same realm of playable. It's better than the OTK version in my opinion, but both decks right now are very much leaning on to just kind of being able to skew out wins, but unfortunately having too many factors that make it too easy to deal with. Now we're getting to the part where it's like, it's tough. I've been trying to make white work for a while now, and unfortunately I think if you go pure machine beasts or even pure mecha, and I made a mecha deck list, like I've been trying to make mecha work, guys, and I think the deck's just missing things. I think both of these decks just unfortunately don't get there. If you go pure machine beasts, I think, unfortunately, you don't have enough advantage to be able to deal with what your opponent is doing. Same thing with Mecha. And unfortunately, Mecha even worse because you have more pieces that rely on you seeing very key things like the Infinite Starship or anything like that. So unfortunately, they don't do much. They sit on board. Sometimes in the late game, it feels like they're unbeatable, but they need to get to that late game. And even then, as other colors, you draw more, you see more advantage, you can build wider boards. Might have things like Suppression, which are like copies 5 through 8 of Absolute Ice Shield, but they just don't do enough to kind of win out against what the other colors are doing, in my opinion. At least when it comes to being a pure machine beast or a pure mecha build. There's a couple of things in white that we can talk about that I think are a little bit spicy, but we'll get there afterwards. Then we got pure Star Dragons. Again, same realm as purple. I think you can top, if anything, I think maybe it ranks like this. You can definitely top with the deck. I think you can do incredibly well. Hey, if you run hot and you get your big bang combo every single turn, I think it does amazingly. The thing is, though, I don't believe we have enough density of good Star Dragons to justify going pure. I think there's enough that you can do some really good things. There's Arc that prevents early aggro. You've got Nexus removal in bodies in terms of the starter deck XR. There's a lot of things that you can do, but I think when you're really cut off after your 4 or 5 best Spear Dragons, you're better off really just kind of teching as an all-arounder than going into pure Star Dragon territory. Pterosaurs are playable. Now, I did say that red and purple can like basically top no matter what based on their card pool, but because Pterosaur, if you're gonna play Pterosaur / like Mythical Beast, you really, in my opinion, need to get like everything to be one of those 2 archetypes, specifically because of how your key spirit works. So in that zone, I still think it's probably the best playable deck that I don't think will top, just because Confront can be like incredibly annoying or the other things that you're doing. and you are just red beatdown. And red beatdown having the great magic spells and like nexuses that red gets access to can definitely get there. I just think because this specific archetype really asks you to run only cards of its archetype that really come online, and at that point it's just tough, man. There are a lot of cards that you're not utilizing in your colors that really hedge your matchup. So I think that's where, you know, whereas red and purple in general, I think you can run anything, have a good potential top. I think pterosaurs is like the only one where I don't believe in that. I want to get into these two, but first we'll actually talk about 2-drop aggro. 2-drop aggro is probably the deck that I think is the closest to it's definitely going to top. Mind you, I call 2-drop aggro like the same thing, whether you lean more on god beasts and go a bit more mid-rangey, or whether you're like 22 drops and you just cards go burr. Like the general idea of utilizing the 2-drop archetype. I'm not going to go super specific onto whether you're a blitz version of the deck or not. In general, that style of deck I think is definitely going to top no matter what. And I think there's a chance that it wins. Honestly, like there's a world in which you just run incredibly hot and you're able to out advantage your opponent. So I wouldn't be shocked to put it here. But if I had to put my money in, I just feel so much better about putting it on purple or red because of the tools they have available to them and because they're just less frail strategies and they have a more powerful top end. Whereas yellow needs to kind of build out to it. Now, of course, if you see Cathedral early game, you see your first 2 or 3, and then you're able to draw like 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 cards a turn, which trust me can happen, and ramp 3, 4, 5 cores to be able to go even wider the turn after that. It's incredibly powerful. I just think you need to get there first. So because you need to run a certain level of hot, I will put it at top. I don't think it's within the best card deck in the format, but it's up there. It is very, very close. I'll turn now we're jumping into the weird stuff. And funny enough, they're actually both white. So I've said that white decks right now aren't really all that playable. And that's because they're not playable in the sense of like being able to do what other decks do. Like, hey, I have an archetype. This archetype's really cool. And I'm going to utilize that to be able to build my strategy and win from there. White, you need to kind of go alternative, which I think is incredibly weird, but kind of cool. So this first one here is utilizing the Nexus from the starter deck, which refreshes all of your vanillas. So this is vanilla beatdown. Vanilla Beatdown is a deck that I'm going to put in Rogue because it surprisingly does things. We came across it during my testing with Egg, and I realized how good it was. And it is a deck that it can apply pressure, but it doesn't sacrifice its defense to apply the pressure because you can restand everything. So in that sense, it's incredibly powerful. The only thing that's short on is that because, of course, your cards get no value by themselves, you do need to kind of draw hot. But that said, like if you can draw decently well and you can just attack, block so that you can't lose on the crackback, it's a deck that can do things. I don't know if it's winning anything, but like honestly, I could see a world where like if you haven't tested against Vanilla Beatdown and you're not entirely sure what it does, or your board control options in your deck aren't great because you're trying to win via tempo, I think it's something that can catch you dearly by surprise, especially when they do start taking in like the red to be able to get even more card draw online and stuff like that. So I think it's an incredibly spicy deck. I find it thoroughly amusing, and it's something that I'm keeping my eye on. And there was a world in which I had considered running that for Vegas. Second thing here in the Rogue category, because honestly, it's just untested. Like I haven't personally tested it a ton, but it's a deck that feels like it can do something, is white-red control. So, you know, shout outs to the guys in the Discord, specifically Otter. If you guys check out Jex Gaming's video on the 5 decks that he would be playing, he actually featured a deck list similar. It's not exactly my list. His is more like 4-color control. Mine is more of like a 2-color variant, but nevertheless, white-based control, which doesn't utilize any of the archetypes. You just kind of use some of the best cards in a white that allow you to get to the late game, and utilizing either a bunch of great tempo pieces or removal pieces to be able to kind of push to the late game. So I think it's incredibly hot. I haven't finalized my list yet, so I'll eventually do a deck list because I do want to showcase kind of what this deck can do. But it's definitely there. Like it is the one thing that makes me believe white might actually do something, which is incredibly interesting. It's not the white I want to do. I want to play with mechas, and even machine beasts look really hot. But like if white-red control, which, you know, I've played my fair share of control decks in my TCG career, I'm absolutely down to go for. But with that said, guys, that is my perspective on the meta of set 1 Dawn of History. I'm not, you know, this is my first crack at it. It's generally, I've gone back and forth with a few players and community members on this to kind of land where I'm at, but I could be absolutely wrong. If you guys think your deck should be higher, or like I've placed things way too incredibly high, please let me know in the comments down below. I know I went a little bit verbose with it in terms of like, hey, here's all like the different kinds of purple decks you can play, even though realistically they probably all get together in like a pot. But I do know a lot of players consider playing pure decks, and this is just kind of sway like, hey, if you are going to play pure Star Dragons, this is kind of where it ranks versus kind of the rest of it. If you're gonna play pterosaurs, just consider it. So with that said, guys, let me know if I'm wrong. Hey, down to have a conversation because it would be incredibly interesting to see how everything's going to pan out once we get to Vegas for the pre-launch event. With that said, if you guys like the video, give it a thumbs up. Hey, if you dislike it, thumbs down. It works too. And if you want to watch more Battle Spirit Saga videos, subscribe button's down there. And with that said, I'll catch you guys on the next one. Ciao.